Well, hello everybody and welcome back to the DM's Book Club. My name is Ryan and with me today, as ever, I have Fiona. How are you?
Hello. I'm really well, thank you. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Very good. All covered in lore and Greek-esque gods that we've been reading through today, which I'm looking forward to diving into. But how's your week been otherwise? You all good?
Very good, thank you. I've been on holiday, which has been very nice. And I realised through, obviously, because I'm on holiday and I don't do very much when I'm on holiday other than edit all these episodes, we will be just past Christmas. So all the stuff we did about creating your own stuff, that sort of very seasonal Christmas world I created, that's going up over Christmas. So I'm just amazing at scheduling content. So
Foresight is absolutely scary and a little bit worrying. Oh wow, that's mad.
I know.
Hope Christmas was good for everybody.
Yeah,
and not isolation-y. Yeah. I don't know. It's going to be a weird one this year, but I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to just like putting the tree up. I think as of the time of recording, we were thinking about doing it next weekend. I think that was like close enough. That isn't antisocial.
Well, no, it's a mixture of like, because I don't have any Christmas decorations here because I just never. Look, we could do an own podcast about like why I don't do it, but it's fine. But it's nice. It's nice that you're doing it closer to December. Like I hear people are already putting their stuff up because obviously they need to feel a bit of cheer in current lockdown and stuff. Whereas I'm like,
it's in the underworld, the people like that. But like, I thought it would be close enough. But we love putting them up for like, all the different lights. And well, to be fair, my wife is absolutely obsessed with Christmas and everything to do with it. So it's more of a case of just sort of appeasing her for as long as I can to make everything happy. But no, gods. Put the tree up. The Christmas gods. Yeah, there isn't a Christmas god in this. Speaking of gods and all this Greek stuff, tell us a little bit about what we're doing today.
All right. So today, in our sort of first of two parts, we're going to look at the Mythic Odyssey of Theros book. So it is a source book that came out very recently this year, and it is a Magic the Gathering campaign setting from 2013 that has been converted into 5e. And in particular, what we are looking at, because we talked a lot in the last couple of episodes about creating your own worlds and creating, I mean, I know that's the DM book club anyways, like how to create this and put it in this. I appreciate that's format we've tried and tested. But one thing, I don't know if you'll be surprised by this, Ryan, but I'm not a big fan of gods in general. I find it's like...
Bold statement.
Start strong. Well, we've played it in Civilization as well. When we've played games and we've played it with my fiance and all that sort of thing, I cannot wrap my head around religious wins or religious impact on stuff. Because for me, in my normal everyday life, it's not a big factor. And obviously, it depends on how religious you're feeling or anything like that. Family, etc. This setting, in case you haven't guessed, is pretty much a rip-off of Greek mythology. Any adventure that's set in Theros will have an overriding god influence in some way. And actually reading it through is actually quite interesting to just have your adventurer, your character, have a patron, essentially. Essentially, they're all warlock patrons, I think. That's how I like to think about them. And that they are giving you power or they're giving you their blessing to continue their work. And I just found it absolutely fascinating that your whole campaign isn't necessarily based around what you, the player, wants, but some other entity who's related to all these other entities and so on. So I thought, why not have, let's just say, a truncated look at all 15 gods within an hour and a half. We'll see how that goes. But yes, that's what we're looking at today.
I know, for somebody who doesn't like going into sort of gods and pantheons, it was a unique choice. I'm looking forward to seeing which ones you've sort of picked up as having caught your attention. I mean, where do you want to start? Because there's this whole pantheon of gods who exist and walk amongst the world. Maybe that's a good place to start in terms of sort of how they interact with the world, because this isn't a regular D&D world, is it? This is not, the gods are sort of real, but they don't really exist or have an effect on people directly. This is much more in your face. And, they have a genuine reaction and existence on the world as we know it.
Exactly that. And I think the thing that stood out for me as soon as I started reading this is Theros itself, as the material plane, has two other planes attached to it. You have the underworld, where eventually anything that dies goes there. And then the starry realm of the gods above it, called the Nyx, which I think is hilarious because I think we've all met a character called Nyx in some part of our campaign. So the fact to have a whole bloody realm called Nyx is brilliant.
I like to think, which did your character Nyx come first, or did this come first? I'm curious as to whether you named yourself after a plane of existence.
I think there was a D&D Beyond survey about like what is your first character's name or a character name that's used the most, and Nyx is I think the third most used name. It's on the gnome name list. And I think people just are like, Nyx, that's a cool sounding name. So I think the name came first in the D&D stuff, but then the Magic the Gathering Theros setting came, and then me. So it's all quite interesting.
You made the name into what it is today, I think.
I agree. I agree. No one's heard of Nyx, the small artificer gnome, and no one ever shall. It's... But a few things just to note about this realm. Again, when we talked about creating our own worlds and stuff, there was obviously a couple of rules and stuff that just outline what the world is. And I think that's kind of important when it comes to talking about Theros and the gods themselves. The big thing about Theros is that it has this amazing metaphysical property where anything that is believed or anything that is thought of and sort of given a justification eventually becomes real. And that's how the gods came about. So they are originally these sort of universal ideals that mortals hold dear to themselves, and slowly surely through sort of devotion and praying to them and doing certain ceremonies and stuff like that, the gods themselves sort of came into existence, and their power is from getting this devotion, this having mortals pray to them. And it's not necessarily a zero-sum gain as it sort of describes in the book. It talks about like you can pray to multiple gods. Their main sort of goal is trying to get one over on the other gods, but that's just reducing their influence and getting other people to pray to them. So again, very sort of politics, I like to think. Like you are all constantly sort of getting people to sort of pray to you because you will help them in the harvest, or you will help them give blessings in the war and stuff like that. So I think that's a big thing to think about when you're thinking of the Nyx, is that everything is here because it has been believed in at some point.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
They're like a big squabbling family, aren't they? As much as anything. Like they're all sort of related, if not they're the same thing, but they're not, and they're not related, and it's all based on the stories you read. But yeah, the idea that they exist because people believe in them is a really cool one. And I always think of like a sort of Terry Pratchett-esque sort of like feeling about that one, where it's like, the gods only exist because people believe in them, and if you stop believing in them, then they stop existing, and
exactly
just competing with each other for mortal services and mortal worship and stuff. I mean, that as a concept has been put into the game, hasn't it? This sort of idea that the more you do for a god, the more you believe in the god and do things in their name, the more the god sort of exists in your life and sort of bestows things upon you.
Yes, and again, this goes back to what we were talking about before when we talked about honor and sanity as a seventh and eighth modifier for your character. There's something called a piety score. So with gods, they will choose champions or people, adventurers that they hold up high as that this is the ideal of what I want my followers to do. Being a champion of a god there's no benefit in it of itself. Like you're not going to be like, well, I am the champion of Heliod. You need to respect me. That's as it is. But if you do services and actions that are in line with your god's ideal, then you gain certain benefits, and essentially it's called piety. Every session or so, if you do something that is within your aligned ideals, you get a point or two, depending on how your DM's running it. And at certain points, you get levels, essentially, or you get special bonuses. And you get them at sort of level 3 piety, 10, 25, and 50 as well. And most of them, when you look through the Pantheon, they're all very similar. You probably get a couple of extra spells that you can cast if you're not a spellcaster, advantages on saving throws. And usually if you become a champion of your particular ideal, so when you get 50 or more piety points, you get an increase in a stat that is related to your god, and then that maximum also increases by 2 as well. So it is essentially just I've now completely forgotten an ability score improvement. I completely forgot what they were for a second because I never use them.
Sure.
But this thing, again, it's optional. Again, none of your adventures have to be a champion of a god, but actually it makes sense in the setting because the gods are so, they are here, they are living and breathing. And the other thing I'll go on to before we move on, the other thing I really like about this, and it's something that I didn't really consider until reading about it is that it talks about the gods being, because of the way they are brought into existence, they're not all powerful and they're not all knowledgeable. They are fickle, they are infallible, like they're very, very strong and pretty much indestructible. So you can't necessarily take a god on as a mortal, or you might need several forces to take one down, but they're not this all-seeing, all-knowing presence that we maybe think when Western gods are, that they're not all good and they're not all evil. There are sort of shades in between. And I just thought that's just a really fascinating thing to have in your campaigns. And I don't know if other D&D campaigns are similar to that or not.
There's this idea that they see everything that goes on within a temple or a sort of a sanctified image of themselves or statue or whatever it might be. But yeah, outside of that, who knows what they can actually understand and do. I like it as an idea. It's really cool. You sort of you could plan against a god and it just wouldn't know what you were doing, or you could try and backstab it, or like a lot of the tales when you go through this, it always gives a good, like a set of stories about that god and sort of different fables that go along with it. And a lot of them always involve tricking a god or hiding about a god, which is a very sort of Greek idea and sort of Norse idea that the gods are actually, sometimes they're portrayed as being a bit stupid as much as they are all powerful or just even fallible, which I do enjoy that as an idea. Like you're praying to something that isn't perfect.
Yes.
It's not perfect in any way.
And yeah, just like talking about the myths as well, I'm sure we'll probably pick out some of our favorites, or I'll talk about them. What I love about this book is that the myths are short. Like they literally just capture what the story is within a paragraph. And there's like 3 or 4 stories per god that just sort of summarize what the god is. And they're like, like Kruphix, who we'll go on to, that he is a god of sort of horizons and the passage of time and stuff, but having the ability to be a judge in between stories and have that role in there. And there's a couple of stories that sort of link several gods together that clearly are important to Theros in general, but at the same time, you don't necessarily need to know them. I think they're just really nice examples of like how these gods are and what their relationship is to each other. So I would highly recommend reading them out. It's just like maybe about 20 minutes of reading the individual stories. So yeah, I really enjoyed that about this Theros.
Anything, it's like a really good piece of sort of fiction. Have a look at the stories and get distracted. And this is like a really good example. If ever you do want to lose a couple of hours, just go and read about the actual Greek pantheon as well, because the stories and Norse as well, they're all just really funny. Like the ideas that kind of sprung up to explain the world. I always love them. They're really, really good. You've already mentioned one of the Pantheon. So where would you like to start? What sort of, is there a way of organizing these gods? Is there a way of actually tackling them in like an alphabetical or order of power, or how would you go about it?
So I will say the way it's ordered in the book by alphabetical thing is completely incomprehensible to me. I find like it's just really, I guess you can read it through, but until you start reading like how they came about or when they came about, which I think is more important, then you can make the connections between them. So it does start off with a sort of general, like, here is the 4 stages of how the Pantheon has been formed. In the first stage, it talks about the before times. There was nothing except the chaos of the Nyx itself, where these things, these titans sort of came about because mortal spheres sort of envisioned and sort of enfleshed themselves. So you have stuff like death's hunger, that sort of the horrid sort of feeling that you're going to be claimed by death. Nature's wrath was another one I quite like. Here's another thing very quickly. I'd say the one thing I really dislike about this book is that there's no pronunciation guide at all. So you see,
we do know you like a pronunciation guide.
I do like a pronunciation, but when you have like, I think it's called Flage, which is just Phlage, you're like, I mean, that could be Flage or it could be Flage. I don't know. But you have these sort of titans, essentially, who, again, if you've ever seen Hercules, the film, obviously these titans destroyed the world and mortals lived in fear of them. And then comes the second generation, these two sort of out of the chaos, these 2 gods in quotation marks. Again, it's not really discussed where they came from, if they are gods, if they're completely different entities to the rest of the Pantheon. But you have Klothys and you have Kruphix, and together they binded these titans to the underworld. And what happened was Klothys, the god of sort of destiny and there's the two themes of destiny and fate, which is sort of outlined in the bio, but I always confuse them and put them as the same thing. But fate, as I understand it, is this tapestry that everything is predetermined, very much like the fates in general, creating this tapestry that all human life, all mortal life, sorry, is determined. And when your time comes, you will end up in the underworld. There's no getting away from that. But destiny itself, that's people are destined for greatness. They are destined to do certain things. And that is Klothys. And Klothys is described as this incredibly tall woman with 6 curling horns, but her big feature is having amazing amount of hair, white, long hair that sort of covers her eyes, covers her weapons and stuff like that. And her hair are the strands of destiny, which weave in and entangle humans and mortals alike. Klothys then goes down to the underworld to ensure that the Titans do not leave or do not. And only recently in mythology has Klothys come back and sort of to see the destruction that mortals had and the other gods had, and ruining and changing destiny strands. And now her purpose is to try and untangle them and put things back in its certain order. So that's sort of Klothys' side. Then you have Kruphix. Kruphix is the sense of mystery. He is described as a cloaked figure with sort of 4 arms. You just do not see this person, this sort of shadow that sort of descends over. He's sort of seen as sort of the leader of this pantheon, this sort of a silent judge that sort of arbitrates between the different gods and their squabbles. But he has the power to bind any gods that step out of line to the starry realm itself. And there's a story about how there's so much like confusion and so much arguments between the gods that he wrote the name of every god into the world tree, including himself. And they were all sort of bounded there, presumably to have some sort of like reunion or to have some sort of confrontation and stuff. But what's interesting, and again, I know I'm jumping back and forth here, but the Nyx itself, the starry realm, every night it reenacts these stories of the gods, and you can look up and you can see, great Heliod fighting off with Purphoros, etc. But as soon as this happened, as soon as Kruphix binded the gods to the trees, the stars went out. And there was a great silence across the land. And just that image of just you seeing that as a mortal, shit has gone. It is bad times. And so those are sort of the two oldest, again, in quotation marks, deities who sort of sit at the top of this pantheon, the idea of destiny and the idea of sort of the passage of time and the unknowable, I guess, is of Klothys and Kruphix.
I like to think of that silence as being the ultimate timeout. Like, no, yes. You guys, you've all misbehaved, in your corner, lights out, no gadgets.
No gadgets.
That's gone. They're very cool. I mean, I have to say the artwork running through this book is amazing when you actually look at it. And I love the idea that, all of the gods have this kind of idea that if they're lit, they have a sort of substantial form to them, but if they're not lit, you just sort of see right through them, through to the Nyx and this sort of starry plane. And Kruphix is just this silhouette, and I do love that sort of imagery to him, where it's just stars and nebulas and everything. But these two, they're definitely older. They're definitely, I would say, consider themselves to be wiser than the others. I don't think either of them is sort of good. You could describe they're probably just neutral and sort of they just are.
Yeah, they're both described as neutral alignment. And it's interesting, again, and I know we'll come back to this as well, any champions of these gods, there's obviously ways you can get like sort of favor. So like, how did you come into their sort of these gods? Why were you chosen as these gods? And then the ideals. And most of them, I think, bar good, have this sort of thing where you can be like any alignment, good, evil, chaotic, lawful, etc. But certainly with the neutral ones, it is clear that it can go either way, which I think is just absolutely fascinating.
Exactly. The gods kind of don't really pick, well, they do pick, but they don't specify the exact ideals and personality types that follow them, which I quite like. It's all a bit of a messy nebula. So these two were first. They kind of existed. They bound some titans. They made the world, banished gods to the Nyx, and generally, I think they're described as having a fairly decent relationship between the two of them. They kind of respect each other for being the old farts in the pantheon, and
there is a mutual respect. I think they trust each other the most, but there is this sort of, again, it's talked about with Kruphix, because, like I said, Klothys went to the underworld to ensure the Titans were bounded, but now Klothys has now ascended back to the Nyx. Kruphix is like wondering, what does this mean? What does this do? And what I like as well, again, all the gods have their own descriptions about how they appear and stuff, as we've sort of talked about. What I loved about Kruphix is that he rarely speaks, but when he does speak, he can speak into the minds of all the gods, like an audible whisper, and quiet surrounds him like a shroud. All these sort of metaphors and imagery, and I like this idea of an unshakable sort of leader, but as soon as his friend or his partner in crime or whatever appears, there's a moment where he might flinch, but nobody else sees it. I just thought, that is just really cool. And just, like I said, so Kruphix is sort of the overview of sort of the acquisition of knowledge and the cycles of time. It talks about this horizon thing where you can always see the horizon, but you can never get to it. And I think that just really sums up what Kruphix is, this sort of idea that you're always reaching for more, always getting there, but you never get there. There's no way to perfect it at all.
Oh, deep. Very deep. If these two are very old, very difficult to grasp sort of concepts of fate and destiny, have we got any others that may be a little bit more obvious in what they represent?
Indeed. So it comes now to the third generation. And the other thing I'd say as well, sorry, before I move on, both Klothys and Kruphix don't necessarily need people devoted to them for their power to exist compared to the other gods. Certainly Klothys, because destiny is so interwoven into the fabric of the plane, she will always be there. She'll always have this power, which I think is quite scary compared to the other gods who are always fighting for more power and stuff. But as you said, we're moving on to the third generation of gods. And here we have sort of 5 gods in total. The two, and I say most important in sort of quotation marks here, are Heliod, I always say, again, it would be great to have a pronunciation guide, and Erebos. They're sort of not even twins. Again, some people we've talked about this before, about like where the origin is, who's what parents, etc. There's questions about Heliod and Erebos and how they are connected, but those are the sort of 2 most important in the third generation. But then you also have Nylea, Purphoros, and Thassa, who are they embody the different sort of natural forces. So Nylea is the goddess of the hunt. Purphoros is like the mighty earth and this sort of spark of creativity. And Thassa is the sort of moving, like sort of mighty force of the sea. So the sort of 3 elements there.
Oh, loads to get our teeth sunk into. So the third generation, so these ones, they existed after mortals existed. So they almost have been sort of created by that first sort of wave of belief and sort of the ideas behind what people used to pray to back when civilization hadn't really taken hold yet.
Exactly that. And like I said, we'll go into the 2 most important ones. And I say this important, they have the most impact on Theros itself. So you got Heliod and you got Erebos. And Heliod is lawful good. The image of him is, I imagine him to be sort of like the Captain Hammer or King Richard, essentially, this sort of ideal of good, lawfulness, the sun god, essentially. And everyone in Theros pays some sort of lip service to this god, whether or not it is just by just as a morning greeting, perhaps, or if they actually do every single sort of, I think it's like breakfast, lunch, dinner, praying as he makes his way across the sky. He is an interesting character because, again, whilst he is this sort of encapsulation of lawful good, he feels that he should be the ruler of the whole Pantheon. He thinks he should take his rightful place and remake the Nyx in his image. There was a great quote in it, which I loved, was saying like he doesn't expect servitude or anything like that. He just wants people to listen to him and take out his orders.
That's I just want people to listen to what I want to say, because I'm right. Everything I do is right.
He's very bold, very brash, and because of his ambitions, it rankles up all the other gods who may not want to be leader of the Nyx, but also it encroaches on their territory. Certainly, Nylea and Thassa, they don't see him as much of a big issue because, they control sort of these natural elements. There's only so much Heliod could do until they just retake it back. So they're not too fussed, but his biggest sort of rival, his biggest sort of, not even enemy, but just the other side of the coin, I guess, is Erebos, who is sort of the lord of the underworld. Again, Hades, if people are more familiar with that sort of terminology. He is sort of the god of everything that comes to pass. He sort of knows that anything that dies will belong to him in the end. So he's a very patient god who takes his time. His hate is when souls escape the underworld without due cause. And this is another part of Theros, which again, I've sort of skipped over, but when a soul escapes through the underworld and back onto the mortal realm, their sort of soul, their identity splits from the body. Again, I will get this wrong, the sort of the pronunciation of it, but it's Elion is like a spirit of some sort, but it leaves this sort of hollow, horrific body with no memories, no ability to form long-term experiences, and their face is sort of a hollow sort of mask of nothing, and they have to hide their features with this golden, beautiful sort of death mask, and they are called the Returned. And Erebos hates these creatures. They are an abomination because they are defiant to his rule. So he does everything in his power to make sure they do not make it across the river that circles the world, and reclaims them. And when you read about the sort of myths about it, about people coming to reclaim their loved ones in exchange for their own souls, he's more than happy to do it, but at a big cost. And again, this sort of idea that Helios, I'm never going to say this name right, Heliod and Erebos are constantly fighting each other because it's like good versus evil, who rules what, etc. Erebos is very happy ruling the underworld. He has no intention to rule higher, but the fact Heliod just wants to rule everything is enough to sort of have this horrible grating tension between them. And I just think it's great. Like,
yeah, it's dark and light, isn't it? And I like the idea that Heliod just always kind of has this sort of realization that Erebos could just win if it wanted to, or like there's always that potential that, you know, he can't be defeated. He's always going to sort of exist in some sort of weird way. And but I like, the Returned, they're just a horrible concept. I find them really creepy.
The origin of how these two came about is interesting. There's always that sort of way they talk about, like, well, Heliod was always here, the sun was always here, but then when the sun shone on him, he saw his own shadow and then was frightened of it. So he cast the shadow away from him into the underworld, and that shadow is Erebos. And then there's talk about how Erebos actually was the one beforehand. He is the elder brother, and the younger brother of Heliod is sort of the chaotic one of the two, even though lawful good. There's always these different perspectives on how people see gods depending on what they follow and stuff, but I think that's what makes this sort of whole pantheon really interesting. And this is the thing that interests me, is that there's just not one interpretation of the gods. You know, when we've been in campaigns and stuff, and you said, here is this god, and you're like, oh, that's exciting because they like fighting and stuff like that. But then having the other end of it going, well, why are they fighting? What is their intention? It's nice to see that in such sort of clear, defined roles, I guess, in such a way. I will say that there does seem to be a lot of gods to the point where you're like, there's too many. But I just like that they are just these ideals that people do hold valuable and then attribute alignments to them. I just thought, yeah, just really, really great.
There's always that idea that, you know, they exist purely because people want them to exist in a sort of weird way.
Definitely.
It's sort of prayed into existence. So we've got darkness and light. What else have we got? What? So you were talking about more natural forces in the world.
So the sort of final three of the third generation, you've got Nylea, Purphoros, and Thassa. So Nylea is sort of the god of the natural world. She controls the seasons, the metamorphosis, rebirth, and forest. Pretty much is climate change in a bottle, I think. Like, some of these gods have a bit more details than others. So she has a few like extra things, like she's got like a lynx that she looks after. There's like a fawn who's her favorite friend. Again, it's little details that can come up later in myths, but you don't necessarily need to know all about it. Her big thing, Nylea, is that she controls the turning of the seasons, and she can make it so that when she is angry, she just stops the change. So you could have a year long of just winter and cold and nothing grows and stuff like that because she has been displeased in some way. There's talk of like the first hunt, the sort of the spring festival that people hold, and she may go in disguise to them to see how, you know, if she's being devoted into some way, if she's been honored in the right way. And if so, then she will give them beautiful bountifulness and promises them greatness for the rest of the year. But if not, then she will cause havoc and sort of this sort of changeable outlook. So she is neutral good. So ultimately, she does want the best for the natural world, but she's unpredictable, like sort of like the winds of change, which I just thought was great. She appears as a dryad, and she's known for her archery. So again, if you're thinking maybe like Athena or anything like that, she's known for that sort of hunting, but it is only hunting that is in good grace. She loves the competition. She loves sort of the adrenaline, I guess, but she doesn't like the sport of it. She doesn't like people killing just unnecessarily. It's a great story, which I think it's my favorite story out of all the sort of myths, called The Free Hunters, where she comes upon the free hunters and demands sort of compensation for the kills they're about to do. One brings a stag, sort of offers it up to her, so she transforms him into a stag to compensate for it. Another brings, I think it was, I don't know, something about money, I can't remember, all the wealth from his family, and she transforms him to a tree that just hangs by a root onto the cliff face. And then the final one sort of is very remorseful and sort of gets to his knees, and then a butterfly appears on his finger. And so he gives that to her, and to show the sort of, I guess, I don't know, showing that he's frail or is in touch with his emotions, she blesses his household for the rest of time. And I just think stuff like that, anything in threes is always a good story, because you will sort of learn through the stuff on that. But yeah, Nylea is just the vision of the green dryad with a bow on her back, and just using the sort of the changes of the season is just quite powerful. I really like that one.
No, she's really cool. It's sort of like an Artemis-esque sort of, goddess of the hunt. No, it's really, really cool. And I like the idea that she sort of, goes after people before they've even done something. Like, I know what you're going to do. Don't you try and like get around this.
Definitely.
Attune for yourself.
And then you have Purphoros, the god of the forge. Again, if you've seen any sort of Hercules or read any mythology, again, the idea of the forge is quite thing. What I like about Purphoros, he is the god of artisans and crafters. Any sort of blacksmithy or anything like that will have a shrine to him or have some sort of a symbol somewhere. It just talks about how he will make amazing bits of art or weaponry whilst just talking to other gods just quietly, and then once the conversation is over, just break it and start anew. This idea that to create the perfect thing, you just constantly go back and remake and break the mold and stuff like that. There's just something about that, just constantly destructive creativity is really great. And my favorite story from him is that he is jealous of twins. So we'll probably come on to I'll never get this name right. Eros and Mogus, the twins, the actual twins in the fourth generation. He's so jealous of them that he made his own twin out of the Nyx. I know, right? But this twin, obviously, it's not alive. It's Nyx born. It has the creativity, but it doesn't have that spark. So over the years, Purphoros has to patch him up. And this twin, this sort of construct, I guess, works in his workshop and can make amazing stuff, but because it doesn't have this life, this anything, you can't compare it to the stuff that Purphoros does. That idea that you want something so desperate, almost like a Frankenstein's monster type thing, where you create it, but it is not exactly what you want. And I just love stuff like that. This idea of like having the joyful productivity and these sort of frustrated anger of things not working, this sort of as a creativity sort of thing, rather than this like, I don't know, combat, I guess. There's just something about Purphoros which is just like, this is just really cool. I was going to say it about all the gods, to be honest with you.
No, I like it. Yeah, it's for creativity, but also the drawbacks that come with creativity, the sort of more accidental destruction and the lack of purpose and the fixation on being perfect without actually getting anywhere. Like I can see all those traits as sort of almost like, I like to think of a lot of these gods, if you think about the warning stories, the sort of stories they may tell children to like send the morals down the lines of, oh, don't be like this person, because then you'll end up doing this and that and blah, blah, blah. And you can see a lot of that in him, in the sense that it's like, don't fixate too much on being perfect, because eventually you'll have nothing and you'll just still be making it over and over and over and over again.
I do quite like in one of his goals, again, all these gods have like goals of what they want to do, whether it's lead the Nyx or to do other things. My favorite one of his is that his biggest wish is just to be left alone to do his creations. And I'm like, God, I think we both felt that at some point. I just want to be left alone to do my thing and not be interrupted by all these other outside influences. I just thought that's just such a mood, I think. finally, we've got Thassa. And Thassa is just essentially the god of the sea, aquatic creatures, and in brackets, unknown depths, which I'm just like, ooh, great. Basically, the sea is Thassa, and Thassa is the sea. She can speak through water droplets. She can crush ships in a brief moment. Her children are described as the krakens of the sea. So any harm that comes to any creatures, you will feel her wrath as a result. She's described almost like a female triton thing with tentacles for hair and then a crab-legged crown, if you can imagine that. Again, the image is quite spectacular, and she likes to tower over these mortals. Again, she's neutral, so she can be either evil or good, but I just like the idea she just likes towering over because she's just like, fuck it, why the hell not? I am the sea. They can't stop me.
Exactly. She's like a big force of an entity. Like you can't imagine, fighting water if she has 60, 70% of the planet under her control and entire areas that no one else would go. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can see why she would be a bit scary.
A bit like Kruphix, she talks about sort of the long-term change. Whilst change does happen, it takes a long time. So like the sea eroding, like the cliffs, the defeating or getting to cities and washing them away slowly but surely. It is the eventual things that everything will come back to the water. And all these gods have various sort of relationships with each other. So like Nylea, Purphoros, and Thassa, they're considered as siblings because of the way that nature is with them. But the idea that like Purphoros and Thassa are better friends than they are with Nylea is a great thing. I like the idea that there's always one favorite sibling or two of them gang up together on the other one. But they're all equally, they all admire each other, but also at the same time are very wary of each other because they know their power can easily, certainly with Purphoros, could just easily erupt at any time, and they could just take that creative whim and just destroy big areas of land. So I was just like, oh yeah, I love all this sort of thing, and the way they sort of connect to people. So that's sort of the third generation. You've got Heliod, Erebos, so there's the top two there, that life and death, or light and dark even, and then you have the nature forces of Nylea, Purphoros, and Thassa.
Awesome. And next time we're going to talk about the fourth generation, aren't we? Which is more of a sort of civilized concepts, I would say, or the things that civilization may bring after existing for a little bit. And some really cool ones in there. Looking forward to it.
Before we go, Ryan, is there anything you'd like to plug? If there's anything like, what are you up to or anything like that before we continue?
You can come find me on Discord. Come say hello. I have an Ursa Ryan Discord. It'd be good to say hello to people. Otherwise, you can find me on this podcast where I lurk pretty much every episode.
Most episodes, yeah, definitely.
Most episodes.
And I'm Fiona. I run the What Am I Rolling podcast, a twice-monthly RPG one-shot podcast. Going well, as always. I'm doing some more panels coming up, or they're probably passed by now. Again, time is wibbly-wobbly right now, but doing some of those, doing some more streams and stuff. So if any doubt, just check out the website or check out the Twitter, and there'll be more details of it there.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! All right, until next time, we'll see you then.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.